or arrange any financing, and only made an introduction to a guarantor. Well, today, thousands of ambulance workers have been striking for the third time in 5 weeks. Unison and GMB union members across England and Wales walked out, along with staff at 2 hospital trusts in Liverpool. Further industrial action is planned in the coming weeks by nurses and other NHS workers. Union leaders are calling for fair pay, accusing the government of not wanting to find a resolution. And households with smart meters could receive discounts if they cut down their energy use for a second day in a row tomorrow. 26 suppliers are signed up to the National Grid's Demand Flexibility Scheme, which involves paying businesses and households to turn off some appliances for an hour or two. The electricity system says it's going to run the scheme again from 4:30 to 6 p.m. tomorrow after the first live test ran today between 5 and 6. And Ofgem says the energy price cap could fall below £3,000 from April. It's said to be due to a fall in the wholesale price of gas and electricity. And it was possible to lower average costs for households, meaning little savings for energy users due to the government's price guarantee. That protects users from higher prices. But it could save the government billions of pounds in the process. And lastly, a firefighter is fighting for their life after battling a blaze at a former department store in Edinburgh. Scottish Fire and Rescue were called to the Jenners building at around 11:30 this morning. 22 emergency vehicles were sent to the scene. The Fire Brigades Union says at least 5 firefighters have had to be taken to hospital for treatment. Those are your news headlines. You are up to date on TV, online and DAB+ radio. This is GB News, the People's Channel. We're now on your box. It's Laurence Fox.
Careless, but not deliberate. That's apparently how the HMRC described Nadeem Zahawi's tax dealings. It's not entirely clear which bit of the affair was careless, but not deliberate. Was allocating a 40% stake of his startup to a company in tax haven Gibraltar, but repeatedly telling Kay Burley that he did not benefit from any offshore arrangements careless, but not deliberate? Or was he having his lawyers threaten Dan Needle, the tax expert investigating Nadeem's dealings with libel, careless, but not deliberate? I mean, we've discussed poachers playing gamekeepers on here before, but with apologies to Oscar Wilde, to accidentally forget to pay £3.7 million in taxes could barely be regarded as a misfortune, but to do so whilst Chancellor of the Exchequer could feasibly be regarded as deliberate. If he does get the sack, perhaps Mr. Zahawi should go into PR. Careless, but not deliberate. What a line that is. Our regime should have used it more often. Much better than this effort by Rishi Sunak to drum up a bit more trust in the regime.
This government will have integrity, professionalism, and accountability at every level. Trust is earned, and I will earn yours.
Ofcom compliant face. Thanks, Rishi. Were he not too busy buffooning around the streets of Kyiv, our ex-Prime Minister should have whipped out careless but not deliberate the other day. What with his 800 grand loan being guaranteed by the man Johnson then went on to recommend carelessly to be chairman of the BBC. Then there is the economy. They've locked a generation out of the housing market, condemning them to a life of no kids and renting a shared cupboard between 6. But that's all right. The millennials will manage with Netflix and avocados, I suppose. An unfortunate situation, but doubtless a careless one, not a deliberate one. Inflation skyrocketing, and we're on course to be poorer than Poland by 2030. Get in. Not least in part due to the plucking of £400 billion from the magic money tree before shutting down the country and forcing us to walk around Tesco in one direction. Measures never before suggested in medical history to stop the deadly plague that gave us the highest death rate since 2008. Careless, not deliberate. On the COVID note, What about the futile state-ordered separation at death that saw our loved ones uttering their final words alone in the grim backrooms of barely functioning health service, their fingers' final touch, an iPad as they said their last goodbye to their parents, partners, lovers, children and grandchildren? Careless, but not deliberate. Muzzling our children, too, to score socialist brownie points against St. Nicola of the Sturgeon, despite a comprehensive lack of evidence that face nappies have made any difference whatsoever outside of a dentist's salon or the operating theatre. Whisper it now. Careless, but not deliberate. What about the vaccine rollout? So magnificent it made our nation's hearts swell with pride. And even if some young hearts were broken, at least we could rely on the manufacturers, the regime and their commissars in the media when they told us it prevented human-to-human transmission. They did test for that, didn't they?
Regarding the question around, did we know about stopping immunisation before it's entered the market? No. We had to really move at the speed of science to really understand what is taking place in the market.
No, we had to move with the speed of science, leaving Afghanistan in the middle of the night so the Taliban could parade around Kabul with their brand new shiny M16s, Black Hawks and Humvees in the most embarrassing foreign policy escapade in memory, or perhaps ever. Careless, but not deliberate. Flinging the borders open, giving us infinity migrants and housing Albanians in four-star hotels while our own sleep homeless on the street. Careless, not deliberate. What about being so scared of the deranged blue-haired crew that it took them years to pluck up the courage to stop the Tavistock performing irreversible sex changes on kids? Careless, not deliberate. And then on to my favourite topic, the Chinification of the whole education system, where childhood innocence is done away with in adherence to a singular ideology is demanded. Our universities, once the envy of the world, are now reliant on Chinese wonga and turn out only intellectually incontinent, emotionally insufferable, septum-pierced, whining woke warriors. All, of course, in a drive to drag the greatest minds of the next generation down to the level of the most average. All in the name of equity. Was it careless to let Xi Jinping and his coterie of communist condiments through the door? Or was all this part of a deliberate global shift to the Chinese model? A disenfranchised, demoralised population is, after all, much easier to control and make adhere to the restrictive future that ideas like net zero demand of us all. All while China cobbles together another coal power station or 20 and has Xi a good old giggle. But that's because even the most careless among us come up with something half-decent once in a while. But I can't think of a single respectable thing that this menagerie of morons who wish to rule over us have uttered since the days of Thatcher and Reagan. But first, I'm asking you, if you disagree with me, please do get in touch. Email yourviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me @LozzaFox. To discuss today's antics, I am joined now by former editor of the Sunday Mirror, Paul Connew. Paul, is Nadine done?
I think his career in politics is hanging, in the cabinet certainly, is hanging by the proverbial gossamer thread, as indeed is, in fact, public trust in politics, alas, generally.
Do you think that we're now entering a position where there's not a political solution, it's not a political problem, it's actually a cultural problem? We just look at politicians and go, you are all utterly bent.
I think that is the danger, sadly. I mean, I don't think it's entirely true, but the public certainly, I think, are getting a feeling that way. And you were referring to a certain word cropping up, from the HMRC, but in fact it equates to negligent. Careless equates to negligence under tax law. So
it's a good point, actually. It is, isn't it? Because he was saying it himself. The guy who was looking into it, he said, you're not careless. You can make mistakes, but you're not careless in this situation.
But it has a specific meaning, and I think those supporting Zahawi, of course, I'm trying to use careless to tell the public, oh, it's a mistake. It is negligent. That is the key interpretation of careless on tax law. I mean, I feel at the moment Rishi Sunak is presiding over a government of chaos. He's looking very weak himself. I mean, really, OK, there's going to be an inquiry, but that plays for time, really. What he's got to do is ask Zahawi for the full details, and then I suggest fire him, or ask for his resignation. I think it's still only 50-50 whether, in fact, Zahawi is still in the cabinet, this time next week.
But what about, is this not just a sort of Labour plot to unsettle the Tories still further? I mean, is it actually done?
A Labour plot. I think the only plot that's going at the moment really is though plotting to bring back a certain charlatan called Boris Johnson.
Why is Boris a charlatan? I mean, I know why.
We got the saga of Boris, his £800,000 loan, curiously broken, or partly through an introduction by the man he was about to appoint as the chairman of the BBC, none of which was made transparent, which is why there are now 2 inquiries looking into that one. I mean, it feels like we're caught in the middle of something that's a cross between an episode of The Thick of It and the House of Cards. Only the Houses of Cards tend to collapse, though, Laurence.
Should we not care what politicians do and only care about the effectiveness of their policies? Should we forget about their personal lives and the fact they're all robber barons?
No, because the clip you showed, Sunak stood outside number 10. I mean, the only thing about Sunak is probably preferable to either Johnson or Liz Truss, which isn't a very high bar. But he stood outside number 10 talking about integrity, accountability, transparency, and all of those things have gone by the board effectively at the moment, and it underscores how weak he is. The fact that he hasn't already demanded, either sacked or demanded, Zahawi's resignation speaks volumes about his weakened position. But the Tory party is, in fact, somehow it's in a sort of civil war situation. There are so many factions that it can't really govern.
Do you think Lord Frost was correct?
That's not a Labour plot. Labour are just seizing on the opportunities which are being almost gift-wrapped to them at the moment.
Do you think Lord Frost was correct when he said that there is a Liberal Party for the Liberals and the Conservatives, those Liberals that are in the Conservative Party should just go over to the Lib Dems? Or do you think that the Conservative Party should try and be more inclusive and diverse in their... The interesting
question, Laurence, is if the polls prove right, if the Tory party takes a hammering at the next general election, will the Tory party survive as it is? It's also had a great recovery ability, so I certainly wouldn't say it's going to fall apart necessarily. But I think there would be a possibility of the Tory party splitting in a way. But of course, that was predicted that would happen after the Corbyn debacle for Labour, and Starmer has managed to pull it back. So, you can't write off the Tory party, but it's certainly got massive, massive problems. And of course, if they take a hammering in the May local elections, then the plot, the only real plot going on at the moment, and I don't think it'll work, and hopefully it won't.
Well, it's obviously.
I'm
obviously saying it's not a Labour plot. I'm just saying, is it a distraction being generated to play into the hands of the Conservative Party that are upset with our friend Nadeem?
I think Labour are simply being...
At least they know where they're going, Labour.
Exactly.
When I read Labour stuff, I go, oh, I get it. I understand what you want to do. I mean, I really, personally, I'm not a huge fan. But the Tories have no idea what they stand for.
The Tories are in the position now that Labour were in under the Corbyn disaster, divided, split, factional fighting. Labour are now, at the moment anyway, are a disciplined party. The Tories aren't.
Well, the left have always been disciplined, and the right never have, which is half the problem.
Well, the left haven't always been disciplined. I disagree there, but certainly at the moment...
Well, they've stolen all our national institutions, so I think they've done all right by there.
But at the moment, of course, all this plays out against the background of the cost of living crisis, the NHS crisis, strikes, and it's simply... I mean, we have a Prime Minister who seems to almost be... Well, he reappeared today, but he's been missing in action. And of course, we had Boris Johnson stealing the limelight again. How as you
anyone
Boris
can,
heads to... Whenever
anyone can
he
take
trouble,
a flight to
he heads to Kyiv.
I mean, so does Bono and Sean Penn. Anyway, thank you so much, Paul, for joining me. Right, thank you, Paul. Coming up next, for the first time today, the National Grid has incentivised customers to use less energy between 5 and 6 p.m. Does that remind you of anything, California? By paying them. The reason why is due to the cold weather. The grid is struggling to keep up with demand because a net zero push means that customers will have to be more flexible. Is this to become the new normal? I'll have nuclear power and market policy analyst Malcolm Grimston. Don't go anywhere. I'll be back in 3.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GBNews, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one.
Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like
Absolutely.
on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
He's the king of breakfast TV, and he's back. Eamon Holmes, back on the TV with me this morning.
Even remember my name.
I know, it's been 4 months. You have holy water by your bed?
Oh, yes. Already to bless.
Yeah. Oh, Eamon. Oh.
Why do you not believe anything I say?
Eamon Holmes back on GB News Breakfast at 6 a.m.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you.
GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you.
Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
and right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello. Today, for the first time, the National Grid has asked paying customers to cut back on energy consumption between 5 and 6 p.m. But why, might you ask? It's because the struggling wannabe green grid is struggling to keep up with energy usage during this cold snap, and they've asked for old coal-fired power stations to be warmed up in case they need some backup. Who would have thought that when the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow, the turbines won't turn and we would be stuck for green energy? On a good day, solar and wind generate more than 50% of our energy needs. But this morning, at 10 a.m., it was down to 19%, and at times in December, it fell to less than 2%. We are lucky at the moment that we have the option of coal mines to back us up, but what happens in 2030, when another cold winter faces us? Will we, the masses, be told to sit in the cold and dark for a minuscule amount of money? the greater good of the world, while those who can afford to keep the heat and lights on go unaffected. And all the while, China and Russia and India burn up as much fossil fuels as they like. The head of National Control said that a push for net zero means customers will have to be more flexible. And when asked if this could become a feature of British life, he told the BBC it's something we strongly believe in. We reached out to the National Grid to comment, but we sadly didn't get a reply, maybe because we asked between the hours of 5 and 6 p.m. Anyway, joining me now is nuclear and power market policy analyst Malcolm Grimston. Malcolm, should the poorest in society have to turn off their heat?
Well, it's not just the poorest, of course, with electricity bills where they are at the moment. A lot of us are feeling the pain. Ultimately, we are where we are. We've not invested in reliable power capacity for 20 years now in the UK. We've got a new nuclear station at last under construction, for example. But that does mean that if you, as you pointed out earlier, at this moment, we're getting about 10% of our electricity from wind, nearly 60% from gas. Gas is very expensive, so we're bringing back, or talking about possibly bringing back online our coal stations. So, I mean, it's more sensible if you can actually return some money to those who are less well off. But as with all things in life, it's the less well off who get hammered the most when the system doesn't work.
And especially with ideologically driven policies like zero anything, you know, the poorest have been hit the hardest through all of these zero policies. Why are we attacking the poor in this way?
Well, I don't think that's the aim of it, to be fair. And I do think the science on climate change is very difficult to challenge. The argument is, firstly, where do we get the balance between adapting to it and mitigating it in the language right? And can we do it in ways that don't hammer the poor? At the moment, with gas prices where they are, frankly, the more wind, the better on the system, because that will help all of us.
But it's freezing cold and there's no wind.
But that is the problem, and that's why you do need the reliable technologies. I've mentioned nuclear. Offshore wind's a bit better than onshore wind. But we also have to look at what they call the supply side and where it makes sense. I mean, I don't think it's so much a matter of people switching the heating off, but if you can delay, say, using the washing machine for a couple of hours so we get over the peak in the evening, that seems...
But why should we do that? It's 2023. Do you remember in the 50s and stuff when they invented these things, everyone was like, yeah, you can now free up some time to do something with your own life. And now we're turning around to people and saying, excuse me, your kids have just got home from school, don't use a dishwasher.
Yeah, I mean,
it's like, come on.
As I say, we should have been preparing for this moment. We got ourselves over-dependent on Russian gas. We got ourselves in a position where we weren't replacing the nuclear capacity, and we moved away from, coal is environmentally pretty horrible, not just in climate change terms, but in terms of the effect on coal mining, the particulates that are released into the atmosphere that are really very unpleasant, acid rain. I think for environmental reasons...
The acid rain thing I never quite got the acid rain thing, because I was expecting to melt and my house to melt, but it never happened.
Acid rain was different. Acid rain was sulphur in the coal, not carbon. Right. That dissolves in rain, and in effect you get sulphuric acid falling from the sky.
Which would dissolve the statue of the paedophile outside the BBC.
Well, it does dissolve buildings, but it's also not very good for the sea, and it's not very good for woods or forests. And so we've come a long way on that. But moving away from coal where possible was great. Gas has been the wonder fuel for the last 20, 30 years. It's clean, it's easy to use, you can store it easily if you choose to. And it's about half as much carbon for coal. So gas, at least as a transition fuel, is important. And the point with gas is you can switch it on and off. But as you say, we became enormously dependent on Russian gas. We didn't develop our own domestic reserves in a way that perhaps we should have done. And as a result, when the Russians stopped playing ball with us, we've been hammered in the way that we have over the last few months.
Yeah. But so why don't we just delay net zero to 2100? I mean, to the end of the century, for example.
I'll say where we are at the moment, these sources, the intermittency, the unreliability is the massive problem with solar. You know when you're getting it, but it's not now. Wind is variable and a bit more difficult to predict, and those are real drawbacks as we're seeing. But the alternative, it depends what alternative you talk about. If the alternative is, OK, let's burn an awful lot more gas, then inevitably that ties us into the European gas price. And although we have some of our own North Sea reserves and there is an argument for exploiting them better, but they're not infinite. We will be tied into the Russian gas price. We get most of our imports from Norway, not from Russia, but nonetheless, the Norwegians will sell it where they can get the most money.
Okay, so first of all, let me correct that it wasn't a statue of a paedophile, it was a statue designed by a paedophile, because I've got to correct that for the team. What about fracking?
Again, I'm not sure. The issue about fracking really in the UK is how big a reserve it is. In the States, you've
Pretty big, isn't it?
Well, we don't know, because in the States you've got massive areas where nobody lives, where the geology is perfect, and you can produce huge amounts of it relatively cheaply. We've got the twin problems here, that our geology is more complex than large areas of the United States. So getting at the gas which is trapped in the shales down there that needs this high-pressure water to shake it out may be more difficult. But also, we're more heavily populated, and there is a political issue. Having said that, I've always said if we've got a domestic supply of gas, it makes a lot more sense producing gas here if we need it, rather than pumping it in from abroad. All the money goes abroad. There's the environmental cost of bringing it in, whether it's through pipelines or liquefied natural gas. And so from that point of view, I've always felt that it was something where we should keep an open mind. But I don't believe it's a game changer, personally.
But should the UK look to be energy self-sufficient and therefore, totally contained sovereign nation? Should we look to create all of our own energy?
Probably not, in the sense that there are, to take uranium for nuclear as an example, we do have some uranium mines in Cornwall, and we used to produce a bit a long time ago. But actually buying uranium on the very free world market where there's loads of it makes sense, and is not a threat to our security of supply. As with everything, if it's better for our economy to buy something which is available overseas reliably and cheaper, then there's a case for doing that, because that keeps our bills down. But certainly I think Europe as a whole, Germany in particular, is really suffering now for not having thought seriously enough about what do we do about secure supplies if Russia, and heaven's sake, they've done it enough times before last year, if Russia again decides to use its muscle.
Well, they look like they're heading for a winter of discontent, isn't it? Anyway, thank you very much, Malcolm. I appreciate your time on this. Coming up next, we'll be talking about an intriguing investigation which found that over 40 universities helped coordinate research that has links to malign activities of the Chinese state. We'll be chatting to academic Professor Andrew Tettenborn about that shortly. See you in 3.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday on GB News, it's Bev Turner Today from 10 a.m. We're going to be here for you, our GB News family, to keep you up to date, but also make you smile.
The guy went from puberty to adultery.
And I can't wait to bring a few of my own opinions.
I have no time for cultural totalitarianism.
We'll engage in passionate, but always polite debate, with your thoughts and opinions at the centre of it all. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
We are GB News, and we'd like to say thank you to each and every one of you for bringing us your conversations, for helping our great nation find its voice. We are here for you on radio, television, and online, across England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland.
It's not the BBC, you actually get your facts right.
We are proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hi, Andrew Pierce here. Join me every Friday lunchtime for a proper no-nonsense debrief of the week's events. With special guests in the studio and the GB News team on the ground, I'll be getting you up to date with news, some intelligent discussion, and my own sharp take. The weekend starts here with me every Friday lunchtime on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Every weekend, it's Mark Dolan Tonight. Bigger and better, starting at 8 p.m. Friday and Saturday.
Can't be too safe. Bring it on. Has there ever been a more innuendo feature?
And Sundays, we're on at 9.
It's ridiculous. Just get on with it. Maybe you should get a proper job.
Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Oi, oi. Earlier, I asked you, am I talking nonsense? Nigel says, definitely wasn't deliberate. What's wrong with you? Well, you know, how many times do we have to give the excuse of the fact that it's just careless? I think it, or coincidence. I think it smacks of deliberateness to me. Alan says, a well-written, thoughtful, but ultimately demagogical rant. I'm going to have to look up the word demagogical, but I think it's not a compliment. Oh, no one's on my team tonight. Julie says, we don't know the facts, so none of us should be able to comment on this case. It should be a course of private matter between Nadeem Zahawi and the HMRC. Hang on a minute. The Chancellor of the Exchequer forgetting to pay millions of pounds worth of tax to the HMRC is suddenly a private matter. Have we not had enough in this country of things that are private matters now that have destroyed us? I'm sorry, I mean, I know you're not on side, but I'm sticking to my guns on this one. Right, an investigation has revealed that over 40 universities in the United Kingdom have risky ties to China. The Times uncovered that these universities collaborated with institutions that have been linked to malign activities of the Chinese state. These collaborated technologies are said to be linked with Uyghur genocide, nuclear weapons development, espionage, defence research, or hacking from Xi's alma mater, Cambridge. Assisting in voice recognition services that are said to be helpfully assisting in human rights abuses, to the University of Surrey's facial recognition tech being used to identify Uyghur Muslims. It's been notified that these universities are not being accused of knowingly assisting China, but the links are worth speaking about. Here with me to talk about this is academic Andrew Tettenborn. Andrew, good evening. Have our universities been overtaken by the Chinese?
I think to a large extent they have, and probably without knowing it. I think you're quite right to say they're not deliberately helping the Chinese to do all sorts of unmentionable things. What's happened is that, well, to some extent, the government's own policy on universities has come back to bite it. Because if you insist on saying to universities, we're not going to fund serious research, and it's up to you to find somebody else to fund it, and the nice man from the Chinese Cultural Bureau comes along and says, well, here's a cool $250,000, you can hardly blame them for taking it. But I think the other point is quite simply, universities, and this goes both for academics and for university administrators, can sometimes not be particularly worldly, and they can certainly be very concerned with the sight of money at the end of the tunnel. And I think that explains why, for example, Jesus College in Cambridge, again, the alma mater of C who must be obeyed, why Jesus College in Cambridge has taken large sums of money from Tsinghua, from something connected with the State Council of China, from Huawei. I think it's just their natural feeling. If somebody comes along and says this is exciting research, it's their natural feeling to go along with it.
But they seem to have so much time to. The universities seem to have so much time and budget to criticise and chastise and self-flagellate themselves. Why are they not able to spot this creeping influence of the Chinese Communist Party into their own ranks?
Oh, I think that one answer is they don't particularly want to. It was quite interesting, actually, to look back at Jesus College, where the master of the college faced with, I think, this investigation, and certainly faced with an investigation about a year ago, very quickly said, oh, well, no, there's nothing to see here. We do all our due diligence and so on. The trouble is that due diligence very much turns into a box-ticking exercise. Unless you know that this person has something dodgy about them, you're likely to say, well, we'll go ahead with this research. Now, unfortunately, most academics don't like the idea of thinking seriously and saying, well, is this research going to help China do something we don't want it to do? There is a government scheme which I suspect is not operated seriously enough. I've forgotten, I think it's the ATAS, I've forgotten what it stands for, but it's basically a scheme whereby before a foreign student gets a visa to study at a British university in a scientific subject, they have to be vetted. Again, I've had a look at the form that you have to fill in to get ATAS approval, and I suspect that unless you've actually said, I think Xi Jinping is the best thing since sliced bread, and the more we can do for the Chinese army, the better, I suspect that a great many of them get through. Now,
why aren't we exporting Brits in the same way? Why aren't we doing Confucius Institutes in return and sending our values over to Beijing? Maybe that would help.
Some universities do that. One trouble, of course, is that it's a rather one-sided operation, because if a person from a British university goes across to China, that is a country where you're very quickly aware, and I know I've been there about 9 or 10 times, that's a country where you very quickly know there is no generally free speech, and if you say something out of line, you're going to be in trouble. So you tend to be rather careful what you say. And of course, you can also be careful what you say when you get back, because quite a lot of academics want to be invited back to China. That won't happen to me because I've written far too much in The Spectator, being rather rude about the Chinese government.
But are we making this as simple as the fact that everyone's free speech has a price and China knows what it is?
I think that's right, yes. China is trying to gain influence throughout the world in a number of ways. It wants to gain influence over infrastructure throughout the world, and it wants to gain influence in universities throughout the world. Our universities are very prestigious, and it would love to have sort of backseat influence over quite a lot of them. And that's actually the other problem about large grants coming from Chinese institutes to British universities. There was a notorious event again at Jesus College, Cambridge, when one academic there who was closely connected with the Chinese money did say a couple of years ago, can we please not have too much discussion of the policies of the Chinese government, because this would not be productive.
Well, that's the same across the world. You know, you look through show business, sport, anywhere. There's absolutely no criticism of the Chinese allowed whatsoever, and we have given up our free speech at their wit. Thank you. Sorry, I must move on now, Professor, but thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you very, very much for joining me this evening, Professor Tettenborn. We really appreciate your time. Okay, so coming up next, we have museums. Have they become too woke? The Tate have taken down classic art and replaced it with art depicting links to British Empire. We'll be talking to historian Robert Toombs on this. See you in 3.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick CHRISTYS, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. for GLORIA Meets. In exclusive interviews, I'll be finding out who our politicians really are and what they really think.
It's something that you would never want anyone to suffer.
I didn't know what channels there were. I didn't think I'd be believed.
I must have weighed about 7 stone and I'm 5'8".
My instincts was to sort of cover this up. I mean, clearly that was a mistake.
Join me every Sunday at 6 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, right across the nation. You can get us on television, on radio, on digital. We're absolutely everywhere.
Amazing! You see, amazing!
You remind me of me in the European Parliament. But here's the most important bit. We are not part of the mainstream establishment. We think and speak just like you do. We are the People's Channel.
Magnificent. That's really, really thoughtful.
Come and join us on GB News, the People's News Channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
This year on GB News, we've got brand new members in the family.
Join us. Across the entire United Kingdom, we cover the issues that matter to you. GB News will always stay honest, balanced and fair. We want to hear whatever is on your mind.
And we don't talk down to you.
The establishment had their chance.
Now we're here to represent you. Britain's watching.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Hello. Over the weekend, it came to light that Tate Britain is in the process of shaping up their galleries in what's being dubbed a polemic against the past. Thank goodness. The museum, sponsored by your hard-earned taxes, might I add, are removing the likes of Stanley Spencer, William Hogarth, in favour of making a more inclusive experience involving works that relate to Britain's not-so-woke past. Along with this, of course, they are set to provide some analysis explaining the piece's links to slavery, racism, and colonialism. Naturally, the question is, when will this end? Well, just look at the evidence. A similar thing happened with the renowned Wellcome collection just a few months back. After months of consternation, self-deprecation, and flagellation, the museum realised the natural conclusion of their logic to close the museum's permanent exhibition because it was just so purely evil. If the people in charge of teaching our history hate our history, then will it end in the abolition of our history? We contacted Tate Britain for comment, and a spokesman clarified, whilst we may be replacing a small number of paintings by artists such as Hogarth and Spencer with some of their other equally celebrated pieces, the number of their works on show will remain the same, if not greater. The works on show will tell the stories of 500 years of British history, of which colonialism and empire are just one component. We're doing it for you guys. I'm joined now by Professor Robert Toombs of Cambridge University. Professor?
Yes, hello.
What is wrong with completely ripping our history apart and making it much more inclusive?
Well, I don't think the two things follow. Why is it inclusive to try to create division, to try to give a history of the past which is distorted and artificially pessimistic, when we know that we have very good stories to tell which bring us together and which we can feel considerably proud? I mean, one thing is, of course, the struggle against slavery.
They don't want to bring us together. They want to divide us and make us hate each other. What's wrong with that?
Yes, well, that's the problem, isn't it? I mean, I think there's a lot that lies behind this as we're getting to know. I mean, partly it's a sort of rejection of the idea of Western culture seen as somehow dominant and the creator of inequality and racism and all the rest. And I think a lot of it's just fairly superficial stuff. It's curators of museums who want to make a name for themselves or who are scared of getting the sack if they're accused of racism. So for whatever reason, we get these very woke is the word I'm trying to avoid, but you get these rather arrogant and patronizing views of the past put forward by people who have very little understanding or interest in really telling history as it was.
Well, if we've got a problem with the teaching of history in school, and if the teaching of history in school is so painful for these young people to understand, and for someone to go in and we've got to get rid of Hogarth and we've got to get rid of various statues and stuff, should we, as a responsibility to the young people and the next generation who've been utterly brainwashed, should we not just remove everything that offends them?
Well, I'm not so sure because we don't know how many of them are really offended and how much of this is a kind of act. You know, people who want to show that they're progressive-minded. I mean, the young people I come into contact with as students, and I think many kids at school are not really going to be brainwashed by a lot of this. I think they're being deprived of a lot, and they're being told things that are not true. They're being deprived of a rounded understanding of the past, which is really a very enriching thing. But it's being turned into a kind of one-dimensional piece of propaganda, of which I'm afraid a lot of museums are complicit.
And why are we seeing this across, we've seen the National Trust, we're seeing it really across our cultural landscape. And it seems to be a much more recent phenomena. What is the genesis of this hatred of being British?
It's broader than Britain. I mean, there has been for a long time. I mean, George Orwell talked about it in 1940. He said England's the only great country whose intellectuals are ashamed of their nationality. So I think there's always been a bit of that, but there is in other countries too. But I think this latest wave of cultural war is really across the whole English-speaking world. I think it's worse in America than here, certainly. In many ways, I think it's worse in Australia and New Zealand and Canada than here. But we're getting our share of it too. And I suppose it's because we're seen as being, the countries or the culture that created the modern world, which those who dislike the modern world, who see it as being unequal, oppressive, racist, therefore want to discredit. I think that's what sort of lies deep behind it.
Why wouldn't, when there are so many obvious examples of inequality, racism, slavery, etc., in the current era that we live in, why wouldn't it behove these young people to go out and do something about that rather than take a pop at the past?
Well, I suppose a cynic might say, and I feel a bit cynical right now, I think that it's because it's too difficult. It's terribly easy to go to a museum or to write a caption for a picture saying how awful things were in the 18th century. It's not so easy if you've got to go out and, demonstrate outside the Chinese embassy, or you've got to do something about, try to do something to help Iranians. That requires a bit of effort and even perhaps a bit of a risk. Whereas this is a very easy and safe way of proving your virtue.
And are we witnessing the end of history then? Because if history is going to be rewritten in this way and we're going to have the great masterpieces replaced with something else, are we witnessing the end of our civilization as we know it, the end of an empire?
Well, I'm a member of a group called History Reclaimed, which has a website which I hope many of your viewers will find interesting. And we're trying to push back against this. We believe that telling the truth, giving serious research and a proper understanding of the past is the way to resist this kind of distorted propaganda. So, ladies and gentlemen, do please look at our website and you'll find things that I think will perhaps reassure you to some extent.
I think that's absolutely brilliant. Go to History Reclaimed. And just finally, on your thoughts, when do you think feelings overtook facts in society? And can we reclaim, rational, honest, open debate rather than just succumbing to the most offended person in the room?
Well, that's a great question. You can say, well, it goes back to the post-war philosophies of postmodernism, the idea that reason was something that we could never reach and that we were all, in fact, the creatures of our emotions and our prejudices. I think, for several hundred years, people in Europe have been trying to find a way of finding truths. It would be a terrible disaster if we gave that up and thought, well, it's only our feelings that count and it's only my feelings that are true. That's going back to babyhood, really. What adults do is to try to check their feelings against their reason and also to find out how other people think and to try to find out what the facts are. To give all that up would be, in a sense, the end of the Western civilization.
Amen. Check your feelings against the facts. Thank you, Robert Toombs. Right.
My pleasure.
It is now time for Fox on the Spot. Let's hear what you've got for me. Oh, dear. Julie asks, do you have car-free Sundays in the UK? We had them in Denmark in the 70s. No, but my kids have got meat-free Mondays. I'm really annoyed about it. Why is schools deciding whether my kids can have meat on a Monday or not? Ricky says, I nearly missed your programme. I'm getting careless but not deliberate. Very good. Jay says, great show, Laurence. The energy bloke missed something, though. The mining of cobalt and lithium for green energy is more intensive than fossil fuel mining, and therefore it generates more pollution and more inflation. This is absolutely true as well. And whilst our little woke chums are sat on their little iPhones full of the cobalt mined by slave labour in the Congo, they should bear just a tiny thought for the fact that their hypocrisy may be larger than they expected. Anyway, that was Fox on the Spot. Keep sending them in, your views at gbnews.uk. I would like to thank you all my guests tonight for joining me. And next up, it is the wonderful Dan Wootton. Dan, what have you got for us?
Well, Laurence, you've got to stick around because you're back in the next hour, aren't you, talking about migrant numbers potentially hitting 80,000 via the channel and why the idiotic woke Brit Award bosses are going to have to reverse their decision to have gender-neutral shortlists. Absolute madness. So I'm looking forward to that. Plus, two big guests tonight. Jim Davidson on that totally unnecessary attack on him by Sadiq Khan, and live from the US, Rudy Giuliani on why defunding the police is not the right solution to deal with the police mess here in the UK.
We love Rudy. That's great stuff, Dan. Looking forward to speaking to you in a bit. Now, that's all coming up after the break. Do not miss it.
Good evening. I'm Alex Deakin. This is your latest weather update from the Met Office. The north-south split continues tonight. It's clear and frosty for many in the south. Mild and cloudy further north. There will be some thick fog patches, however, particularly under the area of high pressure across parts of the south. Further north, we've got low pressures just drifting to the north of Scotland, but they are bringing westerly breezes, a lot of cloud, a bit of drizzle here and there over northern Scotland. Some light drizzle possible in southern Scotland, northwest England. But for most, it's dry. Where we've got the clearer skies in the south, that's where we are going to see things turning potentially foggy, and certainly it will be frosty once more, well below freezing in towns and cities and much lower in rural spots. Not quite as cold across the far southeast and East Anglia. Quite cloudy skies here, even the odd shower is possible, especially close to the coast. That's going to make for a grey, cold day on Tuesday. Some fog around first thing across parts of England and Wales. May take a while to clear, but then we should see some sunny spells. A lot of cloud across North Wales, northwest England, Scotland and Northern Ireland, with some rain trickling into the Highlands. But some brighter skies across Aberdeenshire. Could see highs of 12, maybe even 13. Whereas further south, 4-5 degrees, even with the sunshine where the fog sticks. Temperatures may struggle to get much above freezing, and a frost will return pretty rapidly tomorrow evening as well. And again, we could have some fog patches thickening up across the south. Further north, a shift. We've got these lines of rain spreading in. These are weather fronts bringing a damp start to Wednesday morning across parts of southern Scotland, and that rain will trickle its way into northern England, parts of Wales as well. So a different day here. Behind there is those weather fronts. Brighter skies will follow on Wednesday across Scotland and Northern Ireland, with just a few showers. In the south, it'll be another cold day on Wednesday, but signs of temperatures starting to tick up here as we go through the rest of the week. Goodbye.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch.
You've been cancelled. Join the club.
Oh my goodness me! And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
Hello there, it's Eamon Holmes here from Breakfast on GB News. We're not just on your television and your screens, you know.
We're on DAB Plus digital radio, so you can listen to your favourite shows on the move.
If you've not yet listened to GB News Radio, it's very simple. We're on your radio player and tune-in apps, on your smart speaker, phone or tablet, or online